Hi, I'm Aidan Brown, and welcome to the Main Stage podcast. We are joined here today by Chad Thomas, one of South Africa's foremost forensic investigators, and he's had quite a career, very popular at the moment. You see him all over the place doing interviews, news, radio, TV. He may even have a book deal in the pipeline. And welcome to the show.
Thank you so very much for inviting me.
It's fantastic to have you. We've been trying to get somebody of your caliber on for quite a while, somebody with your kind of level of expertise, especially given South Africa's very precarious situation with all these commissions. And, we really came to a head in 2025 with the nexus of crime and politics. You are involved with many very high-profile cases and have been in the past. IRS Forensics is obviously quite a prominent player in the South African private sector. I would like to start out by talking about Paul O'Sullivan. We obviously chatted very briefly early on in the day. I always liked Paul O'Sullivan. I thought that Paul O'Sullivan was an upstanding South African, that he always had the best interests of the public at heart, and that he was quite a good guy. And there's quite a lot of tension around his presence and his overlap in the political and security world, the private security sector, and investigations and that sort of thing. And I was just wondering if you think he's just been caught up in some kind of malicious narrative, or if there may be something to the allegations around Paul O'Sullivan.
I think you'll see I've got a slight smile on my face. The smile is getting broader. And it's strange that we started the conversation with Paul O'Sullivan because he's exceptionally topical at the moment. The history between myself and Paul O'Sullivan is dark. He and I detest one another immensely. Okay. And this will be the first time actually in a public forum that I chat about that. Paul O'Sullivan and I have never seen eye to eye. Paul O'Sullivan wanted to create this narrative that he is this white crusader, this white knight. He's got this crusader complex that our country needs saving, and he's going to be the one to save us. And I appreciate the fact that people want to try to save us. We do have problems, but I don't think Paul O'Sullivan is the one that can save us. Paul O'Sullivan himself has a lot of issues that need to be addressed. Paul O'Sullivan is a bully. We all know that. He's bullied a lot of people, myself included. He tried. Back in the mid-tweens, so around about 2015, 2016, thereabouts, he sent me an email to say when elephants fight, it's the ground that suffers, and he was implying that he and I were having a fight. I didn't know we were having a fight, and it was in regards to an interview I was doing that night on Radio Today, on a show called Changing Destiny with Paul, not with that Paul, the Paul that was the host of that show, where we were going to be breaking down a couple of things. I was a regular on the show. We used to discuss crime stats, and he wasn't happy that one of the topics under discussion would be himself.
Yes.
And when I got to the studio that evening, there actually was a board meeting because he had called them all and threatened them, much the same as P.W. Botha did in the 80s, and said that he will destroy them if they have me on air. Now, I found this quite bizarre. During that same time, Paul O'Sullivan was taking on the likes of Nklemeza, Paklane, other names that have come up in these commissions, and it was affecting our industry as investigators.
Yes. Because
Nklemeza issued an unlawful standing order or directive to all police stations to say that they cannot cooperate with private investigators or they may be charged. Now imagine a police officer being told you can't cooperate with a private investigator. We as private investigators are there as a force multiplier, as a resource, as a capacity. We there as an interpreter to take jargon from a specific industry and translate it into something that's understandable for the policing service and the prosecutorial authority so that they can have an enrollable case. We are there to assist our complainants, our clients, in navigating a complex criminal justice system. Now, because of Paul O'Sullivan's fight with Nklemeza and Paklane, Nklemeza issues the standing order as a collective punishment to the entire industry. So I, on behalf of the industry, together with 6 other well-known investigators, called a meeting together with the police top brass, including General Prince Mokotedi at the time, who was head of the Gauteng Hawks. And it was reported back to O'Sullivan that this meeting had taken place and that we were conspiring against him. It wasn't. He was part of the focus of the meeting simply because he was causing unrest in our industry. We were not able to fully deliver on our commitments to our clients because of this unlawful order that had been issued by Nklemeza as a result of O'Sullivan's actions. O'Sullivan opened a case of racketeering against myself, the other investigators, and the generals. How bizarre is that?
He's got a reputation for being highly litigious. He likes to use any mechanism of the law to...
So it gets better. He relies on hearsay testimony from Piet Viljoen. And for the listeners and the viewers, yes, that Piet Viljoen, the Tammy Taylor Piet Viljoen, the Piet Viljoen that's fled to America.
Yes.
Piet Viljoen, who was on trial for 114 million rand property fraud, was the one who tipped off O'Sullivan about this purported meeting,
yes,
where it was discussed about, according to Viljoen, the takedown of O'Sullivan. It had nothing to do with the takedown of O'Sullivan. It was to do with us being able to work properly with our peers within state law enforcement. And the blunder that O'Sullivan made, it was in the front page of the Citizen, was called the O'Sullivan Conspiracy. He named all of us as being part of this. Number one, a racketeering certificate can only be issued by the NDPP. Number two, it was investigated by IPID, which is very strange for us. IPID has no jurisdiction over me. I have a regulatory authority, CIRA, and if it's a police case, SAPS must investigate. General Mokotedi is head of the Hawks. There's the office of the DPCI judge that should have investigated him if he had done something wrong, which he hadn't. But it was sitting with IPID. And we got called to IPID. And there was this massive meeting at IPID with Matjiu Sissoko and all the senior members. Myself and my partner Glenda attended. And I asked them, does this meeting revolve around the hearsay evidence of Piet Viljoen? And they said, well, it's not necessarily hearsay. There's a statement. It's Paul. I said, but Paul is the complainant. They said, yes. I said, but he is relying on Piet Viljoen. And they said, yes. I said, well, read this. And I gave them a document. And they read it, and the oxygen was sucked out of the room. Because that was a statement that Paul had made in support of General Shadrach Sibir during the time that Piet Viljoen was attacking Sibir's integrity.
Yes.
And in that statement, Paul alludes to the fact, O'Sullivan, that Piet Viljoen is a pathological liar and you cannot believe a word he says. Yes. So I asked these IPID members, so which is it? This I think it was 2016 statement where he's relying on Piet Viljoen, or this, and I think it was 2013 statement where he's saying Piet Viljoen's a pathological liar. And that was it. Case was over. And it showed me that Paul isn't the great investigator he makes himself out to be. But I want to make a point now. I don't like what's happening at the moment with the scapegoating. I don't think Paul O'Sullivan is the reason we are in the mess that we are in. If you listen to Ad Hoc and you listen to Madlanga, he's getting the blame for everything.
Yes.
And that's not right. Firstly, a lone Irishman, a pathetic one at that, doesn't have the power, the influence to have crippled our police force. In fact, he was always pointing out faults within our police force.
Yes. And that's why I initially liked him, because he used to be that guy that seemed to be a social justice guy. Sorry, continue.
So Paul, in my estimation, is not what he makes himself out to be. He's not a hotshot investigator. He had the cheek in his book to say, I suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect. Thank you, Paul. Because I wear gold chains, I don't wear them today for this podcast, and I happen to have tattoos, he called me the Tattoo and Gold Chain Brigade. All of these childish things have come back to bite him because Paul is now on the back foot because of the way in which he tackled things, sending people messages while they're testifying in respect of policing issues in our country and threatening people while they are live on camera. It's wrong.
Yes.
Sending out numerous emails at midnight, it's wrong. Phoning people, it's wrong. Being abusive towards SABC interviewers is wrong.
He's highly combative is the one thing that I will say about Paul O'Sullivan. And I guess to some extent that's maybe why I liked him at a certain point, because he was so combative. He appeared to be this guy that would go after the big guys, and with time, it appears that reputation's kind of crumbled a little bit.
Not a little bit. Not a little bit. Feed into Grok or ChatGPT or Gemini, any AI, for them to go through social media posts and to give you an estimation of what the populace thinks of Paul O'Sullivan now. He has lost the majority of his credibility. He's only got Alec Hogg who blows his trumpet for him. Most people are not interested because they've been bullied. He bullied journalists, he bullied their editors, he bullied their publishers, he bullied TV interviewers, he bullied their producers. He is a bully. And he built an incredible brand, and he should have stuck to the brand, but he wanted to continue and continue and continue with the so-called savior complex, whereas in actual fact, all he was doing was building his own brand to monetize it. So Paul O'Sullivan and I are not friends. We never will be friends. He detests me. I detest him. But I don't think he should be getting the blame for what we've seen coming out of the parliamentary ad hoc, and I don't think he should be getting the blame for what we've seen coming out of Madlanga. It's unfair. I think it's scapegoating, and it's very easy to now push everything onto O'Sullivan, whereas in actual fact, in some instances, he was trying to do right. In other instances, he was pushing his own narrative. And in the rare instance, I think he was looking at how best to promote himself, to protect his clients, to line his pockets.
I think you've been quite fair and gracious. You've critiqued him, but you've also given him his dues where necessary. So I think that's a fair assessment.
Look, I was taken by surprise that you opened with Paul O'Sullivan. I didn't expect it, and it's so in your face at the moment. I'm not sure when this is going to be aired, but if you listen to ad hoc yesterday, it was Paul O'Sullivan. If you listen to the ad hoc the day before, it was Paul O'Sullivan. And the bizarre part is he's not willing to give a proper right of reply unless it's on his terms. He's refusing to attend Madlanga unless he can do it virtually because he's now suddenly in danger.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. I've tried to ask many people about Paul O'Sullivan over the years in various capacities. I've read a lot of his stuff. And not very many people are willing to speak about him simply because of how combative and litigious he
Well, what more can he do? With me last year, January, exactly a year ago, we attended a fraud conference at the Leonardo in Sandton. He happened to be speaking. I was there. He did not like the fact that I was there. He left in a huff. He didn't stay for the duration of it. And when he got to the parking lot, he sent me a WhatsApp. He said, "You must know by now that I believe you are a criminal, or I think you're a criminal, or you're a criminal, and you must not come to any event where I am present or I will name and shame you." And I said, "But Paul," I replied to him, I said, "But Paul, why don't you name and shame me? I was hoping you'd do it last year at the ACFE conference when you were selling your book of drivel and offering people a free ticket to Las Vegas. Seriously, if you want to out me, what are you going to out me for?" He's convinced, and I don't know whether it's projection, I don't know what it is. I'm not a saint. I don't present myself as being a crusader or a white knight the way he does. I don't put people that are holding senior positions in law enforcement and try to hold them to account in the courts of public opinion. It's not my role. My role is to investigate fraudsters in the private sector. I know my limitations. I know the regulations of CIRA. I cannot investigate somebody without their mandate. Without a mandate, rather, from a party who's been prejudiced to investigate a person of interest. He just digs into people's backgrounds. He posts their credit scores or who they owe money to online, their criminal records. He calls me a convicted tax felon. I'm not. I had problems in 2006 with the tax man, which came back to haunt me in 2014 during the SARS rogue unit debacle. It's well published. One of my companies did badly. A lot of us have had tax problems. I pleaded guilty to drunken driving in 2003. I've been very open about my battle with alcohol and drugs. Why threaten me? It's something that's in the public domain. Why threaten anybody for that matter? If you are so certain that somebody is bad or has nefarious intentions and you've got the evidence to prove it, then follow protocols. But sending people messages, phoning people, sending notes, that's not right.
I guess I will say that the reason I'm so interested in Paul O'Sullivan actually is because I simply cannot figure it out. I'm a moderately well-informed guy, but for some reason I cannot peg or place Paul O'Sullivan. I don't even know if he's done it intentionally in some way to create a little bit of an air of mystery around him somehow, but I just cannot peg the guy. I don't know if he's a good guy. I don't know if he's a bad guy. I don't even know who he represents. It's just such a strange case, but I'm very, very interested to see how things unfold with him over the next couple of months with Madlanga and General Mkonazi. I see he's suing Mkonazi for 5 million, coincidentally in civil court for defamation. Good luck with that. I was wondering if we could chat about VIP protection units in South Africa.
Private or public sector?
Let's talk about both. Let's talk about the public sector VIP protection units. They have become something that is almost a symbol, a traveling kinetic symbol of South Africa's corruption and mismanagement. A lot of people feel that there's too much money being spent on these blue light brigades and that they are unnecessary given the risk profile of some of the people that are being carried in them. And I was just wondering, do you think the size of them is so necessary? Like operationally, do they even make sense? Do they actually provide more security for somebody that isn't, for example, high profile, that could just fly under the radar? There's just so much negative sentiment from the public towards blue light brigades in the public sector. And I was just wondering, are these actually necessary? Is there some other operational mechanism by which these guys can work that would be less intrusive on the public?
Oh, most definitely. I recall when I was in the military police, there were specialized military policemen who went to a specific company at Provost School, which was the training academy for the military police, where they were taught VIP protection, and they were called general drivers, not because they could drive anything, but because they drove generals.
Yes.
And they had a specific skill set, and they were very good at it. And you didn't see cavalcades. You would see a mid-level vehicle. The driver would be a MP. The passenger would be the officer commanding of a region or a senior member of the GOC staff. But it wasn't excessive. The same with the protection around our politicians. You must remember that during apartheid, the liberation movements would have scored a huge success if they had taken out a major leader within the National Party, yet you didn't see the National Party driving around in these massive cavalcades. The reality is that we do have a crime problem in South Africa, but the cavalcades have taken on a different meaning. It's almost to show importance.
It's a status symbol.
It's a hell of a status symbol. So you've got mayors that drive in cavalcades. You've got premiers that drive in cavalcades. You've got ministers that drive in cavalcades. You've now got MMCs at local government, MECs at provincial government, ministers at national government that all have these blue light brigades. These blue light brigades are completely unnecessary. We're now finding that other people are also accessing the VIP protection, and somehow the risk assessment, the threat risk assessment is being manipulated, that they require this kind of protection. Yes. I remember Muhammad Ali coming to South Africa in 1993. Autocity in Asia sponsored 3 BMWs for the entire entourage. There was a 5 Series, a 7 Series, and a little 3 Series chase car. And the traffic department provided us a vehicle. The police provided us a vehicle with some members, and it was guys that knew what they were doing. It was the likes of Pierre Kutzer, a very famous boxer who was in the police. A very famous general now was then in the VIP protection, because at that time in 93, the ANC wasn't in power. Muhammad Ali was a guest of the ANC in South Africa. Can you imagine Muhammad Ali being assassinated on South African soil? And strangely enough, within days of him landing in South Africa, in fact, the day after he landed in South Africa, Chris Hani was assassinated. So you can imagine what was going on in our country. And millions upon millions of people swamped the streets to see Muhammad Ali. And this tiny crew of people that were involved in his protection, I happen to be one of them. I'm very fortunate to have been one of them. We looked after him, and we were successful looking after him. He was taken to the stadium for the funeral of Chris Hani. And you can imagine the chaos there. And he survived it without having this huge cavalcade,
Yes.
as did Mandela with his protection team that was provided to him. It's become too much of a status symbol. The
Yes.
vehicles they drive, the amount of people that they have, it's become a massive cost implication for the government. We were looking at the stats about 3 years ago. If you take 100% of the police budget, which at that stage was 100 billion rand, and you looked at how it was divided, at that stage, the Hawks, which is the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, remember the word priority,
Yes.
they there to investigate the serious stuff that's happening in our country. They were getting 2% of the police budget. Conversely, VIP protection and security services were receiving 3.5%
Wow.
of the budget, almost double that of the Hawks. And the Hawks have never been fully capacitated. They're sitting at about 50% now. The most they've ever been capacitated is 60%. But let's go to the private sector. You now see the private sector, tenderpreneurs, millionaires, businessmen, suddenly having white light
Yes.
brigades.
Yes.
And they now are mimicking what's been done by government. They're also going through red lights. They're running sirens unlawfully. They've got all these heavies carrying long guns and short guns. And we're finding that a lot of these tenderpreneurs, the Vusi Capitalistas of this world and others, are buying security companies using proxies and nominees to access the weapons, to be able to have this crew looking after them. Some instances, these crews are bigger than our presidents. We've heard that Vusi Capitala had more special force members and ex-task force members than what we see in cavalcades protecting our top politicians. That's frightening. But herein lies the problem. You've got this little private militia now that is licensed to carry weapons in the security industry, to run white lights, to be branded, and they don't just look after you. You now need to use them for other purposes. So you've got a dispute. You don't want to go to court and that case take another 5 years to resolve. You're going to use these heavies that you've employed to go squeeze somebody, to go muscle them. Yeah. You're going to use them to start settling disputes. We saw something emerge out of KZN, which was very interesting for us. We saw taxi bosses buying security companies so they could have legitimate protection.
Yes.
Then the other rival taxi boss would buy a security company. Then these two militias would fight one another in a proxy war. When these taxi bosses make peace, they've now got access to these weapons, access to these people, but there isn't really anything for them to do. What do they start doing? They hire them out as Izinkabi.
Yes.
They hire them out as soldiers for CIT heists, ATM bombings, kidnap for ransom, and like I mentioned, the Izinkabi, murder for hire. So I'm very concerned about the example that was set by government with these blue light brigades that are now being mimicked by bad actors in the private sector.
That's an amazing point. I have actually never thought about it. I am aware of these rogue or these dodgy private sector white light or blue light brigades, but it never actually occurred to me until now that these guys are actually just mimicking government and public sector. I used to live in a small town, a really, really small town, and our mayor had a blue light brigade of about 5 vehicles. There's only, I'm not going to mention the town, it doesn't matter, but there was only one robot in the town.
Crazy. And they'd block off that robot.
And sometimes you would get there and they'd be parked outside the local coffee shop, but it would be like they were protecting
Obama.
Cars parked at funny angles and guys in the Oaks having a cup of coffee. He coincidentally had a 20 million rand perimeter fence put up around his house on the taxpayer's account that they couldn't, that might give away who it is, that they couldn't do anything about. But yeah, the public in general is starting to really, really feel bitter about the blue light brigades, but we've definitely seen the abuse in the private security sector. There's no doubt about it that these companies are going for muscle for hire. I think that SIRAP, the Private Security Industry Regulatory Authority, is sleeping, that they are doing probably the best they can, but from what I understand, they need way more capacity.
So let's talk about SIRA. It's headed up by Sam Chalke. He understands the industry. My industry, believe it or not, the investigations industry falls under CIRA. We have to be registered with CIRA. They needed a place for us. We weren't big enough to have our own regulatory authority, so there's a section of the Private Security Industry Regulation Act 56 of 2001 that makes provision for private investigators. We have to be registered.
Yes.
A lot of people say they're registered with self-governing bodies and therefore they can perform investigations. That's not strictly correct. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners has a back-to-back memorandum of understanding with CIRA that their members have a registration. The ICFP, the Institute of Commercial Forensic Practitioners, is working towards that. If you, for gain, offer any form of investigation service in South Africa, you have to be CIRA registered. And we make up a decimal point. So let's talk about CIRA. There's around about 2.2 million people registered to provide security services in South Africa.
Across all people with sticks to people with big guns.
Yes. So 2.2 million people, of which about 700,000 are gainfully employed in the industry legitimately.
Yes.
So they legitimately are employed. CIRA is their regulatory authority. It's the biggest regulatory authority in the country. Every security officer pays a monthly fee. Every security company pays an annual fee. And CIRA has money. It really does. It's done a lot of R&D over the years. And it really is boxing above its weight in terms of the R&D, in terms of understanding this myriad industry. They don't have enough law enforcement officials and capacity. They're going to get there. Their law enforcement officials actually have peace officer status. So an inspector from CIRA can arrest a person.
Okay.
And we really, really need to capacitate them more. They've even got their own prosecutors.
Yes, I absolutely, they need to be capacitated more.
They have to be, because what's happening now is the industry's become so lucrative that bad actors have infiltrated.
Yes.
They want access to legitimate firearms. They want to have those vehicles with the white lights with the stickers on so that they can pass through roadblocks. They can pretend to be force multipliers, but they're actually bad actors. And when it comes down to actually offering a security service, they are undercutting the legitimate companies by bringing in people who are unregistered, who may be undocumented immigrants using fake papers. Now imagine the risk. Your security services provider is underpaying the very product that you are paying for, and that product now knows all of your business ins and outs. You're asking to be attacked. You're asking to lose just because you went for the cheaper option. And when you look at the security industry as it stands, it's very exploitative. Your product is a human being. You have to look after that human being. If you're not going to look after that human being, you're going to get bitten. But from a moral and ethical perspective, you should be looking after your product, who happens to breathe air the same as you and I. But instead, they are exploiting undocumented individuals with fake CIRA credentials so that they can undercut the competition. And they're creating a situation rife for infiltration and criminal activity to take place.
Ricardo Teixeira, the military guy, he works for Defence Web, or he used to, said to me that he's come across things like this where you get these mills and these guys will hire illegals, or they'll hire guys that are South Africans and they go to these qualification mills where the guys, they don't even do the training or anything, they just mill out the CIRA papers, level A, B, C, or whatever it is, and they give these guys false documents. And he said that it was somebody in the industry that encountered this in another company in the industry. And he said, even those guys can't really do anything about it. He said they report them and, not a lot gets done about it. Are cell phone grabbers, how does it work with the private security industry with CIRA and cell phone grabbers? Those have become a very contentious aspect of the private investigative and, for that matter of fact, law investigations in South Africa. A lot of people are very nervous about them, and a lot of people also believe that there's quite a lot of these units that are out there, and people are using them like as criminal leverage tools, kind of like what happened with Charles Kinnear. His cell phone was pinged to track him, and if I'm not mistaken, those pings were not condoned, if that makes any sense.
So again, I'm smiling, and I'm not smiling for any other reason except for the listener and the viewer to understand that this is completely unscripted, and Aidan jumps into such important topics where you don't expect the kind of question that comes out. So let's talk about pinging, grabbing, two very different concepts but very similar in execution. Pinging is location-based services. It's triangulation. It's to find the approximation of where a cell phone is. It's using tower technology. It was a very handy tool. Oh my word, we were able to shut down syndicates, identify where suspects were, the tracing unit of SAPs. Everybody was using an LBS type system. There was a gray area within the legislation at that time within RICA, and pinging was such a valuable tool. And then, of course, bad actors in the industry got hold of it, and people were pinged. I got the call that a general and a colonel were being pinged in Cape Town.
Yes.
The person that called me is a Section 204 witness in the trial against Nafis Modak. I immediately called a general in crime intelligence, a brigadier in the DPCI, TOMS, and let them know about this. And that person also contacted their handler, because it turned out they had involvement with the police. They were an ex-police member. And it was known within our circles that bad actors were pinging senior police officers. And this was very serious. We didn't at the time know which general it was and which colonel it was. It later came out that it was Colonel Schalken. And it was a concern, and a couple of weeks later, Scholl was assassinated outside his house. And that was so distressing. It was so very distressing. And of course, the immediate thing was, why do bad actors have access to pinging? And pinging was taken away completely. There's no private LBS access at this point in time in South Africa. I get calls all the time, and I say, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I'm not prepared to, even if I could. And it has to be on exigent circumstances through the RICA judge, and it has to be done by the police war room. And this is a concept that people think you can still ping people's phones and it's easily available. It's not happening. This atrocity of killing this great police officer has had major ripple effects, because so many criminals now get away with crimes because they can't be located. So many suspects wanted for serious crimes can't be located because pinging is now so effectively controlled. And there should have been more control mechanisms at that time, considering that bad actors had access to it. But now virtually no one has access to it unless it's exigent circumstances, and it's very, very difficult. When it comes to grabbing, that's a whole different thing altogether. A grabber is a device, and I don't know the technical jargon because I'm not a very technical person, but what it does is it sets up its own tower, and you're able to use a grabber to actually go to a device. You can find that device by sending information to that device, by creating a tower within that area using the grabber. Grabbers have always been an issue because grabbers have been deployed at ANC conferences, whether it's Mangaung, whether it's Polokwane, so that they can identify where there's bad actors. And yes, it is a security threat, and it is a role of crime intelligence. But then, of course, it gets used for bad. Yes. You get bad actors within the public sector that were using grabbers to intercept, to be able to find out what people were plotting, planning, not necessarily bad things, but rivals perhaps for the chosen candidate at that particular conference, whether it was Nasrec, Mangaung, Polokwane, Stellenbosch, whichever conference it was. Grabbers were used for nefarious purposes. They shouldn't have been, and we do believe that a grab was brought into the country unlawfully and that it may still be doing the rounds. It was fitted into a Mercedes Sprinter at the time. I'm sure they've changed the vehicle, whatever it was. But grabbers are an issue because in the wrong hands, it's an exceptionally dangerous tool. In the right hands, it is an incredible tool to disrupt, dismantle organized crime syndicates. But now everybody's so nervous about being intercepted, about being monitored. And rightly so. Sam Sol went all the way to the top courts in this country because of illegal interceptions of Amabungane journalists. And RICA has had to change because of that. Parts of RICA were repealed because of that. We have a RICA judge that should be signing off on intercepts. things need to be done properly, because the minute they fall into the bad hands of bad actors, abuse of that takes place. And bad actors have a lot of money. Hence, they can afford these white light brigades, this muscle. And in some instances, I'm sure they've brought technology into South Africa where they are illegally pinging, and in some instances, illegally grabbing.
I don't know why I think that these things are not the grabbers, but the pingers. I think that they're more prevalent because it's a lower bar to entry in terms of technology required. Whereas the grabber, obviously, that requires a more sophisticated.
Very much so. Very expensive, a grabber. Very sophisticated. You need an operator that understands how a grabber works. And it literally takes you to the person you're looking for. Whereas pinging, you can be anywhere in the world, and it's based on what we call LBS, location-based services. And in many instances, it's quite simple. It triangulates and gives you an estimation of where your suspects are. But a great tool in the right hands, but sadly it fell into the wrong hands. And now, as an industry, we are without a tool.
That's amazing. It's actually a revelation to me. I didn't really realize that that I was one of those people that thought they were out there, and there was lots of them, and they were active, and they were prevalent. I didn't realize that.
No, it's virtually impossible, and rightly so, for the public to access any form of pinging. But let me tell you why it was so important. If you had private sector and public sector partnerships, like we have the E2 project, for example, which is run by Business Against Crime South Africa, a very, very good project. And you've got other projects like the CCIA and the Civilian Crime Intelligence Network, and you've got these community-based operations where they create war rooms or jocks to run projects out of. If you had the cash in transit companies, intelligence members and investigation members sitting with the SAPS members, and they had access to the pinging tools, and they had a group of suspects, because we all know who does what in this country, they would be able to plot those suspects on a random basis. And when they saw all those suspects coming together at one place, they would now know. They've got the drivers, they've got the soldiers, they've got the explosive experts. They now know that there's going to be a CRT heist taking place, because they've now pinged them all to the same location. What they could then do is they could be proactive. They could raid that location, because what are they going to find? They're going to find unlawful firearms. They're going to find stolen vehicles for ramming, and vehicles for getaway, and a safe house. Now, they can be arrested on all of those things. They can be arrested for the illegal firearms. They can be arrested for being in possession of stolen vehicles. They may not be arrested for the CRT heist, but you prevented the heist from taking place. And you've still got these guys charged. Can't do that anymore, because your private sector, who are by far helping to capacitate SAPs and our force multipliers, don't have access to these tools. So these tools should be made available under exceptionally strict circumstances. And the memorandums of understanding that create these public-private partnerships between state law enforcement and private sector law enforcement have to be reinforced. They have to be expanded, because in the short term, that's the only way we're going to win the fight against crime.
I mean, look, it makes complete sense. And I think it fits into a larger theme that the South African criminal justice system needs to be modernized. You're talking about access to good levels of technology to the people that need access to that level of technology. But it would be great if they could digitize Central Firearms Registry, if they could digitize SAPs. It all fits into a general need for an infrastructure upgrade in terms of just the modernization. I mean, the fact that all the courts still work on paper systems, that you can go into any court on any given day, and the wrong clerk's on duty, and they've got the wrong file, and the file's in the other room, and they can't. I mean, it's crazy.
So let's talk about that. The civil courts are moving more towards virtual and more towards case lines, which is everything uploaded electronically. You interviewed Judge Edwin Cameron. He was one of the very first people pre-COVID to testify remotely in an Australian court against the extradition of Roger Stratton to South Africa, who was involved in the Kebble killing. So we can do a lot of things. We should have facilities within the awaiting trial sections of prisons where they can remotely have those prisoners appear within a court. So it's virtual,
Yes.
rather than having them transported, putting the public at risk of jailbreaks, that type of thing. The digitization is a project that Diane Barnard championed many years ago when she was still Shadow Minister of Police, and it's been a project that is 26 years in the making. The police went from the CR, the case register or the criminal register, to the CAS system, the criminal administration system. So there has been some movement over the years. They do scan things in, but you still rely on that docket. If that docket goes missing, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
And this comes down to the inherent problems within SAPS that we are seeing exposed at Madlanga and the parliamentary ad hoc. And that is that there's been a deficit in leadership within the police for the past quarter century. It's now 26 years since Celebi was appointed. We know how that turned out. Cadre deployment doesn't work. Ria Piecha was appointed. She had no clue how to run policing. Marikana was on her watch. Becky Kele was dismissed as police commissioner because he was embroiled in a lease debacle through Shabangu, where they were going to lease Sanlam Middlestad in the heart of Pretoria for 500 million rand a year. These were all politically appointees. These guys had no clue how to run a police force. And what policeman is going to respect a general that hasn't walked the beat, hasn't been at police college, running around, been treated like a roof for a year? You know, you have to have learnt it. You have to have gone into the police station charge office, learnt the registers, the SAP 13 for evidence, the SAP 14 for booking in prisoners, the occurrence book, how to write it up. You can't parachute somebody into a position of leadership because on paper they've got the theory behind them, they've got the degrees behind them, but they haven't got the practical experience. They haven't dealt with complainants in a charge office. They haven't gone to a scene of a crime. They haven't been involved in a chase or a shootout. Yeah. What policeman's going to respect somebody that hasn't been through that?
No, we've done absolutely horribly in South Africa in terms of our senior police leadership. We really, you're absolutely right about that. It's one of the places where cadre deployment has done absolutely the most damage. But I mean, South Africa is a country where Minister of Health was never a doctor or a nurse. The military person's never picked up an AK. I don't know if you've ever seen that clip. It was a number of years ago where they had the military and defense minister on a range with I can't remember what gun it was, but she couldn't get the safety off.
But again, a minister, political leadership, should they be able to do those things? I suppose so. But they're there for budget, for guidance, for policy, whereas your operational heads, and this is what's come up at Madlanga. Why was the Minister of Police making operational decisions, whereas that's the domain of the Commissioner of Police? But let's go back in time. George Fivers, the very first Commissioner of a democratic South Africa, 95, a year after the democratic elections, the South African Police Force becomes South African Police Service. They amalgamate all the homeland policing into it. They bring in MK members, UPLA members. And at the same time that Fivers is appointed, they decide to try something different. They want to now streamline the police, and they bring in Mayor Khan as the first CEO of the police. The first CEO, we have a businessman who ran breweries come in, parallel to that of the head of policing, who was General Fivers, and he's there to now streamline the police. Was it a failed experiment? I don't know, because there was never, ever another CEO after Mayor Khan. But I could see the thought process there. They wanted to introduce systems to make policing easier. And now we're sitting, how many years since 1995? We're sitting 31 years later. And 31 years later, we're still relying on that brown docket.
Yep.
We're still relying on a C-clip, the investigation diary, being filled in by hand. We're still relying on in-person communication between the prosecutor and the investigating officer. We're still expecting prisoners to be brought to the court just to be postponed and then taken back. It's a system that's archaic and desperately needs modernization. And the only way the state can do that is through effective public-private partnerships in the short term, to be able to resolve the policing issues we have. Because remember this, we came out of a general election cycle a year and a bit ago. This year we're going into a local election cycle. The general election went off without a hitch. The party that had always had the majority dropped to 40%. The IEC showed their fierce independence.
Yes.
Our courts have shown their fierce independence. Our media have held those that are bad to account.
The media have held the line.
We've got a functioning democracy. We've got an incredible country. Geographically, we sit at one of the most important points in the world. Yet we've got massive unemployment, societal issues, and when it comes to crime, we're up there with the likes of Haiti and Afghanistan. Haiti hasn't had a functioning administration in many years, and Afghanistan has been at war as long as living memory that we can remember. Yet we are compared to those jurisdictions when it comes to crime, yet there's so much good in our country. We're not a failed state, and we've never been captured. But if we allow crime to continue, we will reach that point. We've seen how criminals have infiltrated the criminal justice system. We've seen what the Madlanga Commission has exposed. We've seen what the ad hoc parliamentary committee has exposed. And we've heard from a very credible person, Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi, about the rot at the very top. But we knew about it. We whispered about it. Why did it take a general, a July 6 presser 2025 to expose the rot? Why wasn't something done before that? Whether you like Mkhwanazi or not, he did our country a service. He did us a solid.
Yes.
Because if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have Madlanga. We wouldn't have parliamentary ad hoc. We wouldn't have the other issues on the peripheries. Because remember, unlike Zondo, prosecutions are happening. There's parallel investigations from IDAC that are happening. Then you've got other inquiries taking place, like the Nkabinde inquiry into the fitness to hold office of Andrew Chauke. So much is coming out of that in respect of problems within the NPA that we are now at a definitive stage in our country's history. 2026, we have to turn the corner. It's either that or chaos.
I funny enough, did say to Edwin Cameron, and I took a lot of slack for this online. I got really beaten down. I believe that we are on the precipice, that we have a turning point coming up in South Africa's justice system. I know the wheels of justice turns slowly, and there's a lot of problems, and don't expect high-level arrests. But I believe that with the shifts inside Parliament, bigger variety of eyes in Parliament, and all of the sensational headline stories that have come to the fore last year, mainly through books, funny enough, through investigative journalism, we are going to start seeing some prosecutions. I think we'll start to see Rudy Giuliani style prosecutions, where we'll see one or two minnows, then one or two medium guys, and then hopefully in a year or two, one or two bigger names. But I really believe that we are turning that corner, and I'm not an overly optimistic guy. I tend to be a bit of a pessimist. But I think that there is some good news that is going to start to come out of South African courts in the next year or two. Having said that, I'm super, super critical of the courts, just, the general condition and how they operate. I obviously have spent as much time in and out of courts as you have. I have, however, helped a couple of women with protection orders in the last couple of years, in and out of these courts, Johannesburg, Randburg Magistrates Court. I mean, you get there on any given day. The one lady we get there, she's 75, she's diabetic, her leg doesn't work properly, there's no toilets. You get there one day, there's no water. We get there another day, there's only one working toilet, but there's no lift. It's like on the fourth floor. She's got to go up there with her cane. I mean, how difficult would it be to put a working photocopier in a court and just charge people 50 cents per copy as an administration of justice, to help ease the administration of justice? Just these little things. We went there once, the court had burnt down a couple of days before there was a fire at Randburg Court, they had to close the court. There just seems to be almost no administration of justice in these courts. And I really think we're going to start to see some changes. You probably think I'm mad.
No. So let's unpack what you said. You started off with Rudolph Giuliani, and you want to see high-profile prosecutions you think they're going to happen. Rudolph Giuliani used the RICO Act in the early 1980s, around about 83, to prosecute the so-called mafia, the Cosa Nostra. He based his prosecutions on the RICO, which is the Racketeering Act in America, which was promulgated in 1970 and came into effect 1970. He only used it 13 years later. Conversely, South Africa has the POCA Act, the Prevention of Organised Crime Act. The Prevention of Organised Crime Act came out in 1998. By 1999, a year later, Willie Hofmeyer was successfully using it. The first person he went after in terms of preservation orders, in terms of using what was allowed for in that act, was a guy called Colin Stansfield. His nephew Ralph is currently on trial as one of the gang leaders in the Cape.
See that.
We had this Rainbow Nation, a term coined by Tutu. We had this Mandelaphoria, and we had things that were working in the late 90s. Things changed. But we've got the legislation. We've got an abundance of legislation. You talk about the photocopiers in court. Well, it goes to a tender. And now, because somebody has to pay somebody to pay somebody to pay somebody for that tender, instead of delivering 3 photocopiers, they'll deliver 2 photocopiers. Instead of maintaining it once a month, they'll maintain it once a year. Instead of making sure there's enough consumables, paper, printing, ink, they'll provide only a quarter of that because there's so many people in the ecosystem that need to be paid off.
Yes.
And that is why we're seeing the problems we have, because of tenderpreneurs and because of people taking advantage of the way the system is structured. You must always remember there's a symbiotic relationship between bad actors in the private sector and bad actors in the public sector. And their aim is to plunder the public purse. The biggest client for any business in South Africa is government. So if you can get that tender by hook or by crook, whether it's to build a bridge or to provide a photocopy machine, there's people whose hands need to be greased. And the more hands that need to be greased, the less of a service or a product you can deliver because there's too many people to pay off. You even have to pay people to sort out your invoice. Then you've got the compounded issue of the so-called business forums that are actually mafias. There was a bridge that was being built pre-COVID to link a rural part of KZN and the Eastern Cape. It would have been of great benefit to 2 very impoverished communities on either side. This bridge was budgeted for just over R1 billion. Because of the involvement, the threats going into COVID by the so-called business forums that were demanding their 30%, but not to do anything for the 30%. Yes. They just want their 30%. That bridge went unfinished. People left site because of the dangers they encountered. That bridge is now being completed at a cost of between 3 and 4 billion rand.
Yes.
It's a frightening scenario how criminals have infiltrated almost every aspect of our life, that 2 impoverished communities cannot have a bridge linking them that will change their lives forever because people from even within their community decided to form this mafia under the auspices of a business forum. And we see that all the way down to the photocopy machine you spoke about in court.
I was speaking to an attorney from Weber Wenzel a while ago, and I said to him, it's actually really easy to stop this kind of thing. If there is a tender anywhere in South Africa over 100,000 Rand, it should have to just go onto an app. There should just be an app, gov.org.tender or whatever it is. And if you have a tender over 100,000 Rand, it should have all the information on there. It should, just as an example, there should be one line with 5 little blocks. Who gets the tender, who the owner of the company is, the services that they provide, and then just for example, who were the other guys that bid on the tender, and then 2 or 3 reasons why they got it. And as far as I'm concerned, that should be accessible to every single tax-paying South African. And people have turned around and they said, yeah, but what about privacy of information? No, you're doing business with the state. You've got a large tender with the state. We pay for that. If you want privacy, then go work only for the private sector. I just don't know. And I mean, making apps now, it's got to be cheaper than the fraud.
So you're talking about the central supply database, and to a certain extent it's been digitized, but it gets manipulated because you've got bid committees and adjudication committees that are made up of human beings, and those human beings can be compromised, and those human beings are the ones that award the bids and award the tenders. Then you get issues where there are certain bids that are not via the normal process because they most probably called priority or emergency bids, where the person will be appointed based on a urgent need.
Yes, they love
then you've
that.
got below a certain amount where there doesn't have to be a bid, it just has to be invoiced, but you have to be on the central supply database. So you'll have somebody create 3 companies, have proxies and nominees in those 3 companies, and they will bid against each other knowing what they're going to win, and they're going to win, but they were bidding against themselves. Vusi Capital Tyler was a master in that.
Yes, very good.
And Jeff speaks about that in his book, about how these manipulation of tenders took place. It's a frightening scenario that we've got this issue going on, and it's all about money. That's what it comes down to. Our country's in a shocking position because people want to enrich themselves at the expense of the state, which gets its money from the people. And then you look to the societal issues in South Africa. We have the biggest disparity between the haves and the have-nots in the world. And if we don't solve that problem, it's going to become a massive problem. Our biggest unemployed block is the biggest demographic we have in South Africa, which is the youth.
Yes.
What are we going to do about all of this? We wonder why crime is so rampant. Well, there's numerous reasons, and these are partly the reasons why. We have to address these issues holistically. Having the KZN approach of just killing all criminals and saying, well, job well done, that's not going to solve the medium to long-term issues. It gives a lot of satisfaction to people that like to see bad guys taken out, but then it leads to extrajudicial killings. People still have the right to appear in court, and although that person was probably bad, they had a gun, there should be a process that's followed. A lot of people are in support of this. We saw what happened in Brazil a few decades ago when they followed a very similar route. It kind of backfired at a later stage. So we need to work at this, and we can only work it as a country. We can't complain. We have to look at the good that's there. We have to see what made the good work, and we have to replicate it. I'll give you an example. Within crime intelligence, they had an anti-kidnapping task team.
Yes.
That anti-kidnapping task team is a public-private partnership between security companies, investigators, and, of course, the police, who are the lead investigation company. Private investigators and security can never usurp the power and authority of the police. The police are the lead, and we accept that, we acknowledge that, and we appreciate that. That unit that was made up of a public-private partnership had more success than most other units. We need to replicate that within the CIT environment, the ATM bombing environment, the Zama Zama environment, the kidnap for ransom. We've seen how it's working, and replicate it now into murder for hire, like we've seen with PKTT, which was a success. We need to expand on successful units. Rather than knocking those units, the anti-kidnapping task team gets knocked. Why are they getting knocked? Because they're doing a good job. PKTT gets knocked. Why are they getting knocked? Because they're doing a good job. Don't knock them. Replicate them. Don't necessarily agree with replicating exactly what's going on in KZN, just taking out people because they suspects in a crime. But look at what's happening there. People are getting more faith in the police. So there has to be a balance.
In terms of public-private partnerships, I was wondering what you think of the situation with the forensic laboratories in South Africa. It's become an incredibly contentious point. Defense attorneys, criminal defense attorneys absolutely love the situation with the forensic labs in South Africa. They know that there's a really good chance, a reasonable chance, that they'll get their client off just on a missing document or something done incorrectly, or most likely something not done at all. And I would just like your opinion on how it impacts the just the criminal justice system. I don't think people are aware of just how dysfunctional our criminal laboratories are in South Africa.
You touch on such an important point, and I want to expand on it, because I don't think South Africans realize how resolute we are as a people and how dangerous our country's become from a crime perspective. The stats you get can be disingenuous, whether it's deliberate or not, from the NPA and the police. The police will give you the stats of cases that have been opened, and the NPA will give you the stats of cases successfully prosecuted. But there's a huge difference between the two.
Yes.
Let me qualify. If you ask the NPA for their successful prosecution rates in terms of murderers, it'll be above 50%, maybe above 60%, maybe even above 70%. You'll think, wow, murders are being held to account. But if you look at the number of murders, and I use murders as an example because it's one of those crimes that there's a body. So it's an actual crime that took place. Yes. So it's a very good benchmark to use. And it's the most serious crime. Yeah. So when you look at the amount of murders reported to the police compared to the prosecutions that have taken place, of reported cases, you look at only 10%. Yeah. Of murders being successfully prosecuted. That means 9 out of every 10 murderers walk amongst us. Why is that? It's a simple explanation. The NPA are cherry pickers. And rightly so. They're not going to enroll a docket and put all the time and effort into it if it hasn't been investigated properly and if there isn't a prospect of a successful prosecution. That means the majority of dockets aren't being enrolled because there's a problem at the investigation stage. And therein lies the problem, the backlog in DNA. DNA is a very important tool in murder. We've got a 500,000 item delay at the current moment, backlog, in terms of DNA. Now let's talk about something that all South Africans are concerned about. We used to refer to it as GBVF. Or GBV, now we call it GBVF. We've added femicide to it, which is frightening. It's horrific that we've added an F to GBV. If you look at rape and you look at successful convictions, again, there's going to be a disparity in terms of the numbers. Because again, how many of those dockets will actually become enrolled? You've got a situation where, in terms of reported cases, it's estimated only 5% will result in a successful prosecution. That's a massive, massive issue for us. It also means that the reporting becomes an issue because we know from a study by Kells at Wits that only 7 to 9% of cases are actually reported. Yeah, it's a frightening. It's a frightening.
And for male rape, they say it's under 1% or something.
It's a frightening situation that we're seeing this happening, and criminals become emboldened when there's no accountability or no consequence because they know the police resources are at an all-time low. And you've got serial rapists and serial murderers getting away with it because the laboratories are not keeping up.
There's no rape kits, which was actually a question that I wanted to bring up. I wasn't sure if you would even know about it, whether it is in your wheelhouse or not. But there's literally no rape kits in South Africa. So the way that I understand it, if a victim reports a rape, they go to the police station, there's an officer on duty. The officer takes a rape kit from the police station store and they go with the victim to a clinic or a hospital where the test is conducted. And there's then a chain of custody where that kit goes to a laboratory. Police stations have no rape kit. I've heard of a number of people, including Ian Cameron. He did his in Cape Town, but I know of an attorney that did the same thing up here in Johannesburg, where they went round to the biggest police station and said, I want to see your rape kits. Show me. I want to count them. Literally nothing.
We're letting down the most vulnerable of our society. And it irks me when you hear people in suburbia complaining about how bad crime is. They've been able, because they moneyed, to outsource their protection to private security companies. The private security companies have taken over the role of patrolling the roads in suburbia, responding to incidents in suburbia. Yet our biggest victims of crimes are living in decaying CBDs, townships, and informal settlements.
Correct.
They're the biggest victims of crime. There's no white genocide. There's no particular demographic that's been targeted for race-related crime. The biggest target is if you're a black woman or a black child.
Correct.
And we don't talk about it. Instead, the world looks at us as a pariah state because of a non-existent genocide, and our people, our fellow South Africans, are being raped, tortured, and murdered en masse in decaying CBDs, townships, informal settlements, and it doesn't get spoken about enough.
Yes, it's and not just that, but I think even worse than those people are those same demographics that live in rural outlying areas where you will never see a police car, like not in a million years, where the nearest police station's 2 taxi rides away. One of them's on a dirt road for 20 kilometers. People can't even afford to get to the police station. I had a friend who was a very, very prolific boxing coach, and he said to me once, he said, where I live, he said, we live by the rule of the shambok. He said, we've never seen a policeman where I live, and he lives in rural South Africa. It's where his family is from. And that is, people would be shocked, but that is the only form of justice for a lot of people in South Africa is communal mob justice.
So there's talk about giving tribal authorities more power because of what you're talking about in rural areas, and because there's a certain respect that those rural communities have for the Indunas, the Nkosi, the Khosi, whatever you'd want to call them. But there again, there's also the potential for abuse. We do need the tribal authorities to take up a more decisive role in helping those that are in need of help, those that are vulnerable, the women and children in their communities. but at the same time, there has to be oversight.
Yes.
Whether Contraless or whatever the organizations are that are responsible for that oversight has to be done in such a way that it's fair. You can't give overreaching power to an Induna or an Nkosi that's now going to abuse that position. Because we have seen communal property associations abused, we've seen tribal authorities abused, we've seen things that are coming out of these rural areas that are despicable. But you very rightly pointed out that I didn't include amongst decaying CBDs, townships, and informal settlements the fact that we've got a massive problem in the rural areas as well. And it's the same demographic. It's people who are vulnerable that are being exploited. And we tend to forget about them if they're the majority of our countrymen. There's something wrong with us that we're forgetting about those people that are being targeted far worse than we in suburbia could ever be targeted.
I got called a very rude Afrikaans word. I can't repeat it on the show, but essentially I was accused of being a race traitor for denying the white genocide in South Africa. I don't know if you've received similar.
All the time. My Facebook is, I'm not going to block somebody. I'm not going to delete them. If they've got their opinion, I've got my opinion. Yeah. And that's the beauty of our country. We've got this freedom of speech, this freedom of expression. And I make my opinion known. I don't believe that there's a white genocide in this country. No. I believe that Mbeki did us a disservice by disbanding the commandos in 2006.
Absolutely.
I believe that rural security is a massive issue for farmers. I believe that they are targeted because they have vehicles, they've got firearms, they may have money for wages, but they're not being targeted because they're white. Yeah. Then somebody will turn around and say, but then why are they tortured? Well, then I'll say, why does the child get tortured while she's been raped and then murdered in an informal settlement? You know,
yeah, we've got so many problems in this country, and I like to talk about prominent issues.
You have to. You have to talk about what's off limits, and if people don't agree, they don't agree. Doesn't mean we have to fight with each other. Doesn't mean we have to hate each other. Maybe I can be schooled as well, and I'm sure that a lot of my opinions may be wrong. Yes. I know a lot of people don't agree with them, but if they don't agree with them, don't call me a name. Tell me why my opinion's wrong. Tell me what your opinion is, and let's debate like two human beings. Let's not resort to name calling. Let's not resort to what we've seen taking place online. And my biggest concern is you either to the far left of the spectrum or to the far right. There's no more middle ground. And you can't question anything because then you immediately regard it as being to the extreme of one. And that's not the case.
I'll tell you what my experience has been with social media. First of all, social media collects psychopaths and sociopaths. Mike Tyson had that saying about getting punched in the face. All those people that haven't been punched in the face on social media. South Africa is just in a very, very difficult situation, and I think we need to be very, very careful about what issues we really push out into the forefront. Like femicide is a genuine issue. The stats back that up, and South Africa needs to look at that and concentrate on that problem. But the moment you start inventing ideological fictions of political narratives, like white genocide that suits certain people in South Africa or certain political entities in South Africa, it's just a huge distraction, and it immediately takes away from the actual problems that we have. Like rural murder is a huge issue in South Africa, but the moment you frame rural murder as white genocide, you take all the resources, the limited amounts of resources that are looking at that problem, and you just sideswipe them onto something completely different. It's a huge problem that we have in South Africa. Too much political ideology and not enough pragmatic approach to crime solving. A lot of people don't even know what the commando units are. I only found out about them a year or two ago. They were disbanded. I was a small child when they were disbanded. Maybe you can give a quick brief about why you think they were so effective, why they are important, and why they should be brought back. I think a lot of South Africans don't even know what they are or what they were.
So Mbeki disbanded them on a study that they were a threat perhaps to national security because they had been seen as being white units, which they actually had changed. That entire demographic had changed. I got to serve in a commando unit for a short time, East Park Commando, which operated out of Group 18 Durancorp, and our area of responsibility was Hillbrow, Jabez Park, Yeovil, Cleveland, where all the hostels were near Cleveland. And we were force multipliers to the police. We would cordon off areas.
Yes.
The police wouldn't have to worry about watching their back because we could now release the police to go in and search and do what they wanted without having to worry who could breach the perimeter that was established by the commandos. So up until 94, 95, we had conscription. White males. White males were conscripted. The minute you turned 16, you filled in a form in high school in standard 8, grade 10, and you belonged to the police, and to the army rather, unless you could show you were studying each year. So your school would have to stamp.
Were you conscripted?
I was conscripted.
Okay, yeah.
I was conscripted in 1989, but I was never, ever a national serviceman. I instead joined the permanent force of the Defence Force in 1993, and I served to the end of 1994. I was recruited by a chap who was a commandant, became Lieutenant Colonel Clive van Reineveld, specifically within the military police environment, together with counterintelligence, to look at threats that were facing the Defence Force during the transformation process. And I learned so much in that year odd that I was there. But when I left the Defence Force, what used to happen is you would become a camper if you had been a national serviceman. So those same white boys would go back once a year and serve a camp or go up to Angola or Namibia, whatever the case may be, Southwest Africa in those days. You also had what was regimental units, well-known units, Transvaal Scottish, SA Irish, Rand Light Infantry, Natal Carbineers, that members that had served in infantry units or in tank units or in mechanized infantry would then be sent to. When they finished their camps, a lot of members wanted to stay. They wanted to stay on because they enjoyed the military life. And every major defense force in the world has a reserve component. So when the camping ended, when conscription ended, camps ended, they still needed to fill that void. They still had commandos. Yes. Commandos looked after not just rural areas, they looked after urban areas as well. And you even had like an Eskom commando or a Sasol commando that looked after national key points. Those commando units would then get fed from other units. Like East Park Commando, we had members from 2-1 Battalion, which is a 100% black unit. So the commando units had become integrated.
Yes.
We've always had black units. We had 121 Battalion in Matjiu, we had 2-1 Battalion in Lens, we had the South African Cape Corps, which is now Nine-Side, East Rifie and the Cape. We had SAS Jalsina for Indian members in KZN. So there's always Saldana, there were coloured members that served in the Navy. So there'd always been other people of other races within the Defence Force. 3-2 Battalion, 3-1 Battalion was made up of turned Askaris, people that came from Angola or Mozambique, and they fought alongside their white counterparts. Mbeki was scared that the commandos were primarily white, which they weren't at this point in time anymore. I served in East Park Commando in the early 2000s. East Park Commando was majority black, with a leadership made up of black and white. It was a unit that did a lot of good together with SAPS Yeovil, SAPS Jeppe, SAPS Cleveland, SAPS Hillbrow. They worked hand in glove with them, helping to prevent crime. We went from having a citizen force with commandos to having a part-time force, which was then renamed Reserve Force.
How many commandos were there? Sorry.
There must have been in the tens of thousands.
Oh, really? As much as that?
Yeah.
Right.
No, commandos were strong. Commandos
10, I mean, that's way more than I thought.
So they've been talking about bringing it back as territorial forces. Territorial forces, like the American National Guard, are there to protect areas, but at the same time they can be deployed to protect the borders or deployed in areas of war where there's a theatre. For example, we've seen a lot of our reserve force units deployed in the DRC, Eritrea, South Sudan, whatever the case may be. Our military played a pivotal role, but they weren't funded correctly, and we're now sitting with a situation where our defence force is less than 70,000. That is now part-time force members, which are called reserve force members, and permanent force members combined. Much like the police reservists, the army reservists, there's hardly any left because they weren't sent on courses, they weren't offered promotion, and they also, through natural attrition, they reached an age where they could no longer serve.
Yes.
We really need to look at our police reservists, and we need to look at our military part-time forces, because it's believe it or not, it's community-based. If you look at Fort Ikapi, it's based in the Cape, and it has all these reserve units. You look at Fort Igoli, which is based in Kensington. It's got all these bases, all these members that can provide a service, but they're not allowed to because of the change in legislation from Mbeki when the commanders were disbanded. I think the commanders played a valuable role.
There's absolutely no doubt about it. There's no South African that I've spoken to who hasn't come out and said those guys did a good job. And that includes older black South Africans that lived under apartheid. I was chatting to Professor William Gumede from WITS about it. And he also said he doesn't know why they disbanded them. Those guys did a great job.
There's a lot of things I need to ask Mbeki. 1999 December, he had been in office for 6 months after taking over from Mandela. Why did he sign the arms deal into effect? 2 years later, when Judge Willem Heath, the late Judge Willem Heath, asked to investigate what he saw were problems within the arms deal, why did Mbeki not allow him to? Yep. You know, everybody seems to think corruption started with Zuma. They must stop that nonsense. There's been corruption forever, whether it was National Party, whether it was the new dispensation. Corruption is inherent, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And I've never heard of Mbeki for it. There was Mandela for it. Mbeki was always there. He pushed his agenda. He pushed his narrative. He was upset that Mandela only served one term. He was hoping to serve 2 terms as deputy president, as the de facto prime minister, as head of government, and then 2 terms as president.
Yes.
And Mandela kind of scuppered that plan by retiring in 1999. Hence, Polokwane, where he decided to pull a Sam Njomo and try to be the head of the ANC operating out of Luthuli House. You'd have 2 spheres of power, a president of the party with a separate president of the country who would be his proxy. And Mbeki didn't do us much favors, let's be honest. He was an AIDS denialist. He caused massive problems. I'm clearly not a fan.
Well, I'll tell you what happened with Mbeki is that he did a relatively underwhelming job as president. The problem is that everybody that came after him set the bar so low that when you look back, you go, "Oh, that guy was great." And then at that stage of the day, South Africa was actually doing incredibly well. Our economic growth was really good, and jobs were growing, and service dispensation was increasing, and things were actually looking good. Having said that, it wasn't him that did that. He just happened to be in a place and time and history where there was a lot of global positive sentiment towards South Africa, and so there was a lot of foreign funds.
So that was the Mandela Foria. So why was he our de facto prime minister and head of government? Because Mandela, although he was executive president, was traveling the world, bringing foreign investment into South Africa. His charisma, his charm brought that money into South Africa. And Mbeki was doing a good job as deputy president and head of government business. But ego, again, ego's a problem. We currently have a minister of police that I regard as a caretaker minister, and I always worry about caretakers because he's been talking about disbanding crime intelligence. He wears 2 caps. He's also head of an anti-corruption forum that has called for the disbanding of CI, which you could never do. CI is a vital point. The reason I'm talking about that is you spoke about presidents leaving bars very low. Kgalema Motlanthe, that everybody loves, came into office and disbanded the Scorpions.
Yes.
So that's how I remember Kgalema Motlanthe. He disbanded the Scorpions. How do I remember Mbeki? AIDS denialist, disbanded the commandos, signed in the arms deal.
Yeah.
The Zuma years were interesting years. We actually did okay, but there was another narrative at play, and our president sadly was compromised. But he was a man of the people. He had good points. He had bad points. They all had good points. They all had bad points. But listen, under Ramaphosa, we're not doing too badly. Our rand has strengthened significantly. Yes. It's been one of the world's most stable currencies. We've gone from a BB minus rating to a BB rating. We're open for business. We're an incredible country with a lot of human capital that needs to be employed. We have incredible resources. Like I mentioned earlier, geographically, we are one of the best located countries in the world. That also comes with its own set of problems because of transnational crime syndicates using our geographical position, having our coasts. We've got two coasts, the Atlantic and the Indian. But that being said, we need to be positive. You mentioned that you are normally a pessimist. I'm an optimist. And I'm the eternal optimist. I believe so strongly in our country. And I believe if you don't want to be in our country, if you want to just ridicule our country, ridicule the leaders that are elected, then maybe leave our country.
On the flip side of that, even though I am a pessimist, I personally believe, and it's very difficult to justify for a lot of people.
And I wasn't saying you should leave, by the way. No. I'm talking about those that constantly ridicule our country and set out with a fake narrative with their own agenda, like the white genocide. That has caused our country insurmountable damage. We may be excluded from AGOA. Although AGOA has been extended, they can still exclude us from AGOA as a result of this race rhetoric, which has got no basis at all.
I think we did fantastically in the last couple of years. I think, yes, last year was an amazing year for South Africa. I think we did incredibly well in a number of realms. The problem is that when I say that, I immediately get jumped on, especially on social media. You know, everybody's got something negative to say. But we've done incredibly well in so many aspects. The problem is that when you turn a corner, or a country turns a corner, people expect a right angle. They expect you to go from this to that. But it's like the bottom of the hull of a submarine. It's this very long, slow, gradual climb up. And I think we've started to see the climb towards a better South Africa. I think we're going to increasingly see better, more positive metrics coming out of South Africa in almost every regard. I really think that the worst is actually behind us, but only time will tell. We don't have too much time left. There's a couple of questions that I'd like to get to, just because there's
actual questions.
Yeah, there's so few people. Well, we've basically hit, I had a little hit list of topics that I like to.
And have we hit them all?
We've hit through most of them. I find generally in the flow of the conversation, because they're linked, the guest usually moves on to the next point naturally.
You're very good at those linkages, by the way, because one goes into the next. Although they seemed far removed when you hit me with the different topics today. You started with O'Sullivan, you went to Ciro, we went to Grabbers. There's linkages, and they're all very important linkages.
Yeah, they all kind of join a general
and now we're
theme.
talking politics.
Yeah, unfortunately, if you come here, there's no way to avoid it. Sooner or later, I talk about politics all day long. Every day.
Good, and I think we all should. I really think we all should. It's so important because we elect people into office, and they're there to represent us. And that's why when the EFF came into power, the part of me that was so very happy was that they made SONA something that people took notice of. They started looking at how Parliament operates because they wanted to see what would happen during the State of the Nation address. Now we're seeing with the Madlanga Commission, with ad hoc, especially with ad hoc, we're seeing Parliament brought to us. And we're seeing our representatives asking the questions we want asked. So it's been so good for South Africans to see SONA, to see Parliament ad hoc committee at work, and understanding those people are there because we put them there, and they're actually doing a good job in some instances.
I think we had two amazing victories. It was the first victory, and I know this is not going to be a popular thing to say, but the first victory was the budget speech. For the first time ever, South Africa was actually speaking about the national budget, not just the ANC guys inside Parliament and Lutuli House. It dragged the national budget into the minds and mouths of every South African.
And it was stalled because the GNU had a say in it.
Correct.
And it was so incredibly important. You know, with respect to Trevor Manuel, he used to stand up in Parliament and we'd have a surplus, not a deficit, and everybody would sing his praises. But we had a surplus because we weren't building enough dams, enough power stations, enough schools, enough clinics, enough RDP houses, enough roads. We had all this money pouring in, the money wasn't getting used correctly, and then we go spend it on a bloody arms deal that we didn't need. It irks me. It really, really irks me. And you've raised such an important point. I forgot about the stall that took place during the budget simply because the GNU had to have their say, and rightfully so. And it was a budget that was far more inclusive than one would have expected because of the GNU. And look at the GNU. It shows that democracy is working in our country.
Democracy's back in Parliament is what I said to Mandy Wiener a year or two ago, that there was a certain time and place where democracy had been taken out of Parliament and removed and put into Latuli House. They would end the week and all the ANC guys would go to Latuli House and they said, we'll let you know what's going to happen on Monday. And they would discuss it amongst themselves. Then Monday morning, they would go back to Parliament and they would lay down their law. And that ended with the budget speech, with that first budget speech. And the last midterm budget speech that got passed now was an absolute thing of beauty. All the GNU partners got together. They spoke about it. They rationalized. They came together with a good plan, and they quietly pushed it out on time with no fanfare, no fuss, no problems. And that is a victory for South Africa. It's just that sometimes victories are quiet and they're subtle and they take place behind the curtains. We criticize things that make main headlines, petty little things like Masatile's bodyguards beating up her, and that's all over the headlines because it really is sensational. But it is such an amazing thing what we did with this last budget, midterm budget. And I think that kind of thing should be in the media. People should be like celebrating that, to go, guys, we were here. Everyone was at each other's necks. The government was about to fall apart. People hated each other, and we're a year or two down the line and people are just passing budgets now. It's amazing, incredible.
Can the listener and viewer look at Aidan and see the passion that he has when it comes to finances? And it's true. We should have that passion, and it should be explained. And that's why I made the point of the EFF making Sona relevant. We no longer tune into Sona anymore to see the EFF making a noise. We tune into Sona to hear what the president has to say. But they made it relevant. We now are tuning in. When I'm in the car, I'm no longer listening to easy listening music. If it's Madlanga, which starts again on the 26th of Jan, I'll tune into SAFM so I can listen to Madlanga. People are now participating, not even realizing it. Inadvertently, they're participating in the democratic process. They're expressing commentary. Everybody's talking about what's going on with Madlanga. Everybody looks forward to Sona now. And it means that our democracy is working.
Citizens are engaged.
They are.
Yeah. I definitely think that our democracy is working in South Africa. There's no doubt about it. It's just that it turns slower than a lot of people would like it to turn. We're running out of time. The last thing I have to now all of a sudden switch completely to...
No, that's something. All you've done is do that to me. So I'm waiting.
Kidnappings in South Africa. I can remember a time when kidnappings in South Africa it was more like something that your mom was kind of paranoid about, like when you went to the neighbor's house, go with your brother, don't go alone, make sure you don't get into a stranger's car. And kidnapping appears to have turned into quite a big criminal financial enterprise in South Africa. It appears to be, first of all, well organized a lot of the time. And they appear to be well funded a lot of the time. And not only that, but they appear to be quite experienced in this. And I was wondering if we have imported syndicates, so the same way that we now have Mexican drug cartels operating in South Africa, if we have imported kidnapping syndicates from other countries that are operating here in South Africa, and we're just not aware of it, or are these homegrown syndicates?
Okay. So there's a lot to unpack again. Firstly, to your point about being a kid and being warned by your mom, that was something that every mother feared. They feared a Gert van Rooyen situation where a child would be kidnapped by a sexual deviant, trafficked or murdered. And kidnapping was so rare. It really, really was. Then we started getting kidnapping where people would hold you after hijacking you to see whether there was some or other tracking device or security device. Yes. Then we saw express kidnappings where they would take you just before midnight and they would force your PIN out of you so that they could go draw money, and then they'd wait for midnight to kick over to the next day and they'd go draw the balance again for the next day. Then we saw kidnappings in GBV cases where jealous partners or psychotic partners would hold their purported loved ones hostage, and that would normally end very, very tragically. But kidnap for ransom is imported. It's a massive problem. We are number 1 in Africa, number 6 in the world.
For kidnapping for ransom. I didn't realize. Wow.
And it was imported, or rather, it was exported from Mozambique into South Africa. Mozambique, Maputo, was a kidnapper's dream. It was a very similar demographic to what landed up in South Africa with Muslim businessmen who had cash businesses being taken. It supplemented the drug trade, the same people that were involved in importing heroin. So heroin goes from Afghanistan to Pakistan, from Pakistan to Tanzania, from Tanzania to Mozambique. Mozambique, it gets repackaged and then sent into South Africa by road. It gets repackaged again as a transshipment point and sent all over the world. Those same syndicates decided that kidnapping would also be a way to derive revenue. A lot of that revenue went towards terror funding as well, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, by certain extremists. And it was Muslims kidnapping Muslims. It then moved across the border into South Africa. We saw it happening in places like Mbombela, Polokwane, Mahikeng, peri-urban areas where Muslim had business interests, and they normally had wholesalers, and they were community orientated.
Cash and carry.
There was cash, and if you kidnap that person, the community would rally and try to get money together because it was exorbitant amounts. We're talking, in some instances, I think the highest ransom was 150 million, but the average ransom was around about 20 million. We then saw it move into other cash-rich industries, butchers, bottle store owners, fresh fruits and groceries run by the Portuguese community. Portuguese started getting targeted. And then it became a free-for-all. So from a sophisticated kidnapping syndicate that has money to buy intelligence, to buy getaway cars, to buy soldiers, to buy safe houses, to have somebody to communicate who knows what's in the bank accounts. So it's intelligence-driven, and there's finance behind it.
And well-funded,
they're sophisticated. It went to copycats. And the copycats have become a massive problem. Informal settlements. A child will be kidnapped for 500 rand. Suburbia, somebody will be kidnapped for 30,000, 40,000, 100,000.
And the copycats rand. Are probably sloppier.
The copycats are the dangerous ones. The copycats are the ones that don't have intelligence, don't know that the person may be sick, that they need to have diabetic medication ready for them, that they need them in a specific environment, that they've got a specific diet. So kidnapping has become a massive problem in South Africa, but a lot of successes from crime intelligence anti-kidnapping task team. A lot of syndicates have been disrupted and dismantled. But for every syndicate you disrupt and dismantle, there's 5 or 10 waiting to pop up because it's so lucrative.
And you mentioned the relationship between the drug trade. It's funny enough, Calvin Rafati said the same thing. He said that there's significant overlap between these guys. He said sometimes you find the gun guys are also the drug guys, are also the human trafficking guys. And is there a heavy link between the drug trade and the kidnapping trade?
Yeah, there's an overlap with all organized crime. Yes, remember I mentioned to you earlier that a taxi boss has a security business for self-protection.
Yes.
He then uses it to fight a proxy war against a rival taxi boss who's also bought a security company. Now they make peace. They both own security companies. They've got guns. What they're going to do with these guys? So they're going to hire them out as soldiers. They're going to be used in cash and transit heists, ATM bombings, and kidnap for ransom. That is a massive problem. So there is definitely a crossover. Remember, if you need a successful CRT, you need to have people in organized crime vehicle because you need to find vehicles that you use for ramming and getting away. You need somebody in organized crime firearm trafficking because you need weapons. You need somebody who's bringing explosives across from Zimbabwe so that you can blow up the ATM or blow up the CRT van. You need people who are trained in the use of firearms. So you're bringing up Izinkabi from KZN. So there is a relationship between all organized crime. And you'll find the same people laundering the money for all the different syndicates. And as a result of that, they introduce each other to one another and they begin to coexist. We only hear about turf wars coming out of the Western Cape. We only hear about how bad gangs are because of the turf wars. But we don't realize that most times, most organized crime groups act in synergy and they cooperate with one another and they live in peace and harmony side by side. It's when it comes to turf war on a localized level that we see gang
Yes.
wars taking place. And there's a difference between those gang wars and the organized crime we're talking about.
Do you think there's the possibility we're going to see perhaps less cooperation and more conflict with local criminal cartels, homegrown criminal cartels, and the guys that are moving in from overseas, like the Mexican drug cartels? Are the Mexican cartels going to move into South Africa and start using the South African networks and piggyback off them? Or do you think they'll come in and use violence to push the South African players out and try and take over the territory?
So both scenarios have already happened.
Oh, okay.
Sinaloa cartel is operating in South Africa. You must remember South Africa was a transshipment point.
Yes.
Our west coast, we brought coke in. So coke came from South America. It came into some of our smaller harbors, some of our bigger harbors. It was repackaged for transshipment primarily to Australia. On our east coast, heroin came from Afghanistan, Pakistan, down to Tanzania, Tanzania to Maputo inland to South Africa. Geographically, we have a lot of export. So drugs come in, repackaged, drugs go out. The cartels saw this as an opportunity. They established themselves here. Then they thought it's too much of a risk to bring coke across and to bring heroin in. What's the main drug? Methamphetamine. So they started manufacturing locally.
Yes.
To feed our tick market,
Yep.
but at the same time to feed the ever-growing Australian market, New Zealand market, and other countries where we export tick to. So now they bring in their pharmacists. They bring in their enforcers.
Yes.
When you look at what happened with the coke, they're still bringing coke and they're still bringing heroin in so they can try and ship to other countries. But they were using local gangs.
You obviously can't manufacture coke locally.
And a local gang in the Western Cape lost a shipment worth over R1 billion. The cartel sent their hitmen to South Africa, and the gang leader and his partner were found chained and murdered in the Vaal. So we're now seeing the type of gangland killings associated with Mexico, with Colombia, now happening in South Africa.
There was rumors that the assassinations of South African musicians and DJs was somehow linked to the cartel. There was rumors, it could be a complete lie, that a group of musicians got their hands on a fairly big shipment of cocaine, and they may have been trying to sell it or offload it or whatever it is, and they stepped on somebody else's turf, and all of a sudden we've got all of our DJs and musicians getting taken out. Is that just a rumor? Have you heard anything about that?
I've heard a lot about that. You must remember IRS, the firm that I'm with, is on a watching brief for the Safoka family, which is DJ Somebody's family. So we've had to investigate. We've had to meet with members of PKTT who investigated Katie Molefe's purported role in it, Pule Tawe, the police officer's role in it, and others. And we know about the other DJs that have been murdered. Rumor, innuendo, speculation suggests that one of the shipments of coke that was intercepted by the police was stolen from, I think, either Richards Bay or Durban, from police safekeeping, and made its way to Gauteng. You can identify product. There's various ways you can identify product. And that wherever this product ended up being sold, whether it was a place of entertainment that was controlled by a DJ, etc., that if it was found in those places, they then knew that they were part of the theft of this product and they weren't paying back. Or they were given this product after it had been stolen and had to pay back, and they weren't paying back. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. We're seeing a lot coming out of these different commissions. We're seeing a lot coming out of the work done by the PKTT, which isn't just confined to political killings, but they also investigated DJ Somebody's murder. But be that as it may, where there's smoke, there's fire. So we have to look at that. Often a investigation will start with a rumor. That's why crime intelligence is so important. Whereas a police detective will work on a case that's been registered based on a crime that's been committed. Crime intelligence is meant to work on inquiries and projects on what they believe may be happening in intelligence that they are getting. The crime may not have been committed yet, but they're going to infiltrate and find out whether a crime is being committed or is going to be committed or has been committed, and then they dismantle that particular syndicate. And that is why we cannot have our crime intelligence disbanded. We need to find out the problems within crime intelligence. We know it's primarily around the Secret Service Fund, and we need to fix the problems. But we also need to replicate the successes, like the Anti-Kidnapping Task Team, which is crime intelligence driven. And MDOC, which is a unit that concentrates on cash in transit heists and other violent crimes, which is a crime intelligence unit, MDOC. We need to concentrate on their successes and replicate their successes, rather than having our current minister, Kachalia, say crime intelligence must be disbanded. You can't do that. Same as Khaled Mokhlantle saying you must disband the Scorpions. You can't do that. You have to find out what the problems are, fix the problems.
It's a very interesting point. I don't think a lot of South Africans realize the distinction between detective services and crime intelligence. In their minds, certainly in my mind to some extent, it's kind of one large body. But what you say is actually really important to remember, that they serve different purposes and that they do different things, and probably need different resources and skill sets and stuff like that. I shall keep that in mind in the future. We've unfortunately come down to the end of the show. We've gone a little bit over time. And I always give the guest one last punch. If there's anything that you'd like to talk about that we haven't gotten around to, maybe something very important in your life or in the South African criminal justice sector or anything, anywhere. One last message to the guests that you think is really important.
There's so much to discuss. The fact is, we've touched on most of it. We have an incredible society, incredible people. We need to look at what's functioning in our country, what's good in our country. We need to replicate that. We need to find jobs for our unemployed youth. We need to address the societal issues of teenage pregnancy, drug abuse, alcoholism. And most importantly, we need to come together as a country. Having these narratives doing the rounds of white genocide doesn't help us as a country. Not talking about the little girls, little boys, and women being killed in informal settlements isn't helping our country. We need to have open discussions about this, and we need to come up with the right solutions. There are no silver bullets. There isn't a short-term solution to all of this. And all I can say is, let's look at public-private partnerships in the short term, and let's do this as a country together.
That's some amazing insight. You've been an absolutely fantastic guest. You've been very forthcoming with information. You haven't pulled any of your punches. And I really think, especially with the sound bites, that this will go, that this interview is going to see a lot of people. And yeah, we just wish you all the best. Chad Thomas from IRS Forensics, he's entering his very early years as a wise South African elder. He's in his earlier wise South African elder years, and you can find him at IRS Forensics. He's on most of your social media platforms. I know if you need professional services, you can find him on LinkedIn. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with Ben Matjiu, the executive director. Yeah, man, we're just wishing you all the best. We will stay up to date with all your court appearances and everything else that you're doing during the year. And please keep posting on social media. You'd be surprised how valuable your voice is in the fray, and you'd be surprised how many people love to hear from you. I'm certainly one of them. I'm Aidan Brown, Ben Matjiu, Chad Thomas from IRS Forensics. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye for now.